Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ing. That pause was designed especially for me to butt in here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a marriage and family therapist, and before I die of advanced old age, I'd like to pass along some things I think these things are gonna help you. So
yeah, I think so too. I've been applying them in my life, so they've been helping me.
And me too. I live by this stuff. So we'll see.
And how this works is I'm going to present Steve a topic and we're going to chat about it for an hour or so. And today's topic is stuck in relationship inertia. And this is a little different because this is based off an article that Steve sent to me. It was in the New York Times. It was a guest essay by a woman named Hillary Kelly, and it was titled "Welcome to Stucktopia." So you remember this?
Vaguely. It's been weeks since I read this thing.
Okay. Well, I have it with me.
Okay.
So I made notes on it, and we're going to talk about that in relation to relationships, as far as being stuck in relationship inertia. And a lot of the essay in the New York Times opens by discussing some popular television shows such as Fallout, Severance, Andor, and Silo, and how these shows, the author says, are capturing the way life feels right now, which is that we are all stuck.
I love those shows, by the way. I've watched all three of them, not in their entirety, but they do successfully convey that feeling of really being stuck in life and things just endlessly repeating and going on endlessly. And it's kind of a bummer.
She says it's not like what we're living now. She says it's not a dystopia. It's not a utopia. It's a stucktopia. Do you feel that way in all sort of fronts? Like it sounds like she's saying in politics, relationships, in these shows, it's kind of like what the national or the zeitgeist is, I guess. I
think that's a good word for it. It's the spirit of the times.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think she talked about relationships. I can't remember if she did or not, but it just seemed to apply for so many of us. And I like that, she made a point. I'm not saying we're not in a dystopia. It's not like this is hell on earth. I can't believe it. I just can't stand it anymore. It's really the situation 21st century America is in right now, despite its many flaws, is still the envy of most of the world. And I think it would be the envy of most of the people down through history.
Mm-hmm.
So it just has this sense of being stuck, or we all have a sense of being stuck in that any kind of progress seems to be stymied. And there's a need for real progress.
Yeah. And you get that progress, I think, by education and getting not traditional education, but people like doing podcasts and people talking about nutrition, people talking about this sort of relationship advice that we've never had the information kind of given to us. And I think,
well, that's how I tend to think about it. I think she, in her article, was mostly focused on the politics, if I remember.
Yeah. And I'm going to go through it. But for this episode, though, so we're going to examine the article and talk about how people are stuck in relationship inertia. So we're going to take what she says and then apply it to relationships.
Yeah. And just for clarity's sake, it's stucktopia, not sucktopia, which is a related condition.
Yeah. And so I want to start by just reading a line. She says she opens the essay by talking about all these different shows like that I mentioned. And then she says, in all of the shows, escape is unimaginable, endless repetition is crushingly routine, and people are trapped in a world marked by inertia and hopelessness.
Yep, that was my last marriage.
Yeah, so that but that right there, it's like how that she's relating it to TV shows at the start, but that is exactly kind of what a lot of people are going through right now in their relationships, or have gone through, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And then why are people doing this? Like, what are your thoughts on, like, why are they?
How do we get stuck?
Like, how do they get stuck in this endless repetition that's crushingly routine? Like,
at crushingly routine, and by crushingly, I think she would mean not a pleasant routine, but a tedious, boring, stultifying routine, like as in the question is this all there is to life? Is this how good it gets? Is this what marriage is like now? Is this what my life as an adult is? Is the party over? Is, gosh, I mean, where's the joy? Where's the happiness? And even where's the love? So I think that's what we would all think of when we think of getting stuck in our personal lives.
And do you feel like that's the feeling a lot of people are feeling right now?
I think, well, every therapist has a skewed perspective, right? Because we always are dealing with our clients. And of course, the people who show up in therapy are going to be those people complaining of something similar to this, if not the exact same thing. But I think it's also true of vast millions of other Americans who maybe haven't quite figured it out yet. They're still hoping it's going to be different, or they just had an amazing, good experience that will carry them through another, say, 6 months of stuckness. And then they'll realize, yeah, it's not really changing. And then they'll have another mountaintop experience that'll keep them going for another 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, we start figuring it out that no, this is really not changing, and we're really not figuring it out. And it's never going to get better if we keep doing what we've been doing. That's a horrible feeling, I think, for people. Now, I personally live in a very routine romance that, one day is very much like the next or the one before it. And all I can say is thank heaven, because, it's wonderful. I feel loved every day. I feel happy every day. I enjoy my mate's company every day. And so, and I feel like together we have meaningful work and we're going somewhere as a team. I'm amazed by my mate. I am impressed by her humor and her intelligence. And so, yeah, I'm one of those horrible people for whom every day is a delight. And if I die in the near future, I will die very happy, because I really feel like I've been very blessed to have this experience. But I've spent decades of my life not living this way. So I know what it feels like for those people who do feel very stuck.
Yeah. So the relationship could look routine, but that doesn't mean the stuckness isn't in the routine like that. You would say, like,
routine itself is not the issue. It's stultifying routine that really doesn't meet our needs. Now, it's kind of intriguing too, because it's all based on perspective, right? There are some people who are highly driven to experience novel experiences. And for them, and I'm thinking of my former marriage, I would be endlessly boring, because I'd be sitting on a couch reading, and just the act of reading would drive my mate, insane with again with the reading.
Did she want you like going out?
I think for those of us old enough to remember the Love Boat, like the sitcom on TV, there was a cruise director, Julie, I think her name was. I think the expectation of my mate was that I would be Julie and creating fun, interesting activities and experiences on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so the weekend is coming up, honey. Guess what I've designed for us?
Yeah.
You'll never believe it. And I'm in a relationship now. I'm an introvert. I'm with another introvert. The two of us both are bookworms. Okay, so I'm already putting people to sleep. And we both like talking together and hanging out, and we both have our own individual private lives with our own separate friends, his set, her set of friends. And for us, it's endlessly intriguing and very interesting, but definitely not for everybody, right?
Yeah, got it. So another thing she says, then going down the article a little bit, and again, we're just taking what she says and talking about relationships. She's talking more about TV shows and other things in society. But she also mentions how in these fictional worlds in the TV, they're controlled by an overclass, and the folks battling in the mine are underdogs. But then she says, yet they're also complicit to varying degrees in the machinery that keeps them stranded.
Ugh.
So that to me in relationship speak means that these people who are stuck and they're complaining they're stuck or they want to be stuck, they have to understand
They want to be unstuck.
they want to be unstuck. They have to accept that they're also complicit and they are adding to the stuckness. That's what it sounds like. That's keeping them stuck.
Yeah, I heard you read that the first time, and it was a blow to my heart because I remember, of course, being resentful and upset about my failed marriage. But then I had to look in the mirror and say, well, yeah, but you picked her and you stayed for all those years, and that's on you, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
and how did that feel?
Yeah, not so great, right? Although, on the other hand, I mean, in a cheap, superficial way, it would be great to blame the other person, but only by looking at my own role and my own complicity did I discover my power, that I had been responsible for making some really bad decisions, and that I could change my way of thinking and expect a different outcome. So, that was also very empowering and liberating at the same time. It was like some kind of cartoon where, the central character is getting punched and then recovers within a second and bounces up in the air, because that's kind of what it was like emotionally.
Yeah. So, and then when people do come to that realization that or say if they realize, oh, part of me is like perpetuating this stuckness.
Yeah.
Like, what can they do if they don't want to leave the relationship, and if they wanted to actually work on it? Is that when they if you realize it, would you go to therapy? Would you have a conversation? Like, what would you suggest people do then?
Well, I really like what one surfer said to me a long time ago is, no waves, no ride. And so you got to make a few waves, and I think for me, so often I was educated to perceive conflict as a negative, and it's not. It's absolutely not. Abuse is a negative, and yelling and screaming as part of that abusive conflict, that's very negative, very destructive. But to be able to rock the boat, upset the apple cart, and in clinical speak, to upend the homeostasis of a very stable relationship that's as stable as it is miserable, that's important. So I think for everybody listening to this, after first realizing, yeah, I'm really not willing to spend the next 30 or 40 years living like this. This is not making me happy. To then disclose that to maybe one or two people you feel safe with, but very quickly after that, to work up the courage to disclose that to the person you're with, assuming they're not physically abusive, to disclose that to the person you're with and say, this just isn't really working for me. Well, what do you mean? Well, I'm just not happy. I want to be happy, and I wouldn't mind being happy with you, but whether it's with you or without you, I do definitely want to be happy, and this isn't working. What about it isn't working? And then to talk about how it's not really achieving the kind of goals I thought I would be achieving in a relationship, where I'm enjoying it and I'm growing as a human being. Now, this is all really modern stuff we're talking about, right? Because at the turn of the 20th century, nobody in America was getting a divorce, really. And then when people started getting a divorce, it was because they weren't happy. In fact, they were downright miserable.
And it was a pretty heavy taboo, I would assume.
Oh, right? It was terrible. Even in the early 60s when my mother got her, late 50s when my mother got her divorce, I was in school in the early 60s, and I was like the only kid in school who had a divorced family.
Yeah.
But then as time went by, it's now become, well, it's not that I'm not happy, it's that I'm not happy enough. I really want to be happier than I am, because unlike our ancestors, say from the 1800s, where they would be working to survive all the way up through, let's say, the Depression era, and survival was the big winner and putting food on the table for the kids, the endless kids with their appetites, being able to do that was the definition of success. And now, as we've become increasingly urbanized and I think more educated, and we have a society that's more based on equality, yes, I know there's still room to grow in that department, but increasingly people are simply just not happy enough. It's not really working for them. Mm-hmm. And so to get to that point where you're bringing it up, and then you discover whether or not you really made a mistake, because maybe your partner says to you, but I'm perfectly happy. I love what we have here. And if you want to change it, that means there's something wrong with you. You're selfish or self-absorbed. Yeah, that's problematic. And then the next step is, well, after you've talked about it a few more hours off and on over the next few weeks, I think for me, I would want to try therapy. And I say that with some discouragement, because if the other person is really altogether that happy, they got what they bargained for. Mm-hmm. And shame on me that I wasn't more knowledgeable, more self-aware to have made a better choice. Mm. And then it's go straight from the therapist's office to the lawyer's office and, split the sheets and move on. Ouch.
Ouch. Yeah. But it'll be a heavier or a bigger ouch if it continues on.
Well, yeah. You only get this one life. Mm-hmm. And so, no offense, Buddhist, but you get this one life. And then when you're like 20 years older than you are now, if you've been stuck all that time, you are really going to be unhappy. Mm-hmm. And people who are chronically unhappy like that usually end up behaving badly.
Yeah.
We become shopaholics or alcoholics, or we start having affairs, or we start doing something else that in hindsight, we really wish we hadn't gotten into. And the honorable way out is honesty, a forthright conversation, and giving it a decent interval for people to kind of catch up with your thinking. And then if there's really no sign of any potential progress, I think honorably going your separate ways, without waiting to have to learn how to hate each other and screaming and yelling at each other, just to skip all that drama and move on.
Yeah. So to move on in the article, again, this is all going to kind of make sense at the end. So she says, our new fictional nightmares are all about being trapped, mice running in an endless maze, too crowded by the complexity of the system to plow through the dead ends and find freedom. And to that kind of sounds to me like how some people will prefer the familiarity of the misery rather than take the risk towards happiness.
Yeah, because the risk for happiness remains an unknown. And for those who are maybe kind of wondering what this article is all about, I think it's a repeat or an echo, if you will, or even you could call it a rhyme of articles and thoughts that came out about film in the 1950s, where it was about fear of annihilation from nuclear war, communists taking over our country, like in the Manchurian Candidate. We had a lot of fears that got expressed in our movies and TV shows. And now there's this new cutting edge of science fiction that's come out that has us expressing this inner sense of feeling really stuck. And the idea that it's going to go on meaninglessly for decades is a new kind of nightmare that really, I don't think people 100 years ago would even have comprehended. And in, say, 1924, they wouldn't have known what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So it's very new, but it's a condition that I think has been, can I put the word enjoyed in quotes, enjoyed by the elites who married poorly, people with a lot of money who had a hard time walking away from a relationship because of the divorce taboo, because of the money itself, and yet they weren't happy. So that business of being trapped in a gilded cage, I think now there's enough wealth in America that whether we're middle class or not, we have that sense of feeling trapped.
And she says too, to go on, she says, the first step to action, again, to getting unstuck, she says, is to recognize what parts of us are purposely staying stuck.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I kind of glossed over that. The idea of leaving the familiar, in this case, in our conversation, it's a relationship, right? So the idea of leaving the familiar for the unknown that promises only the possibility of change.
well, that's like the scariest part.
That's very scary,
for
right?
most people, they are terrified of that.
Yeah, and it's the same for those people who have a job that's adequately paying their bills. They've kind of got things figured out. They have some sense of security with their mortgage or their monthly payment on their apartment, and even the homeless, where they found an encampment where they can put their tent up and have some sense of stability. To give all that up for something new, a new job, moving to a new part of the country, starting a new career, going back to school. These are big changes that are really very intimidating for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then when you make it relational, particularly after a marriage or after the birth of children, oh my gosh, it's like so hard to make that change.
And how would you, just personally, what are your thoughts about going in that kind of unknown? Like, are you somebody who likes heading into those unknown?
Oh, hell
areas?
No. I'm an inveterate coward, so I avoid that kind of stuff if I can, and I'd recommend to everyone that you avoid it. But if you're so miserable that you just can't stand it anymore, and you know that if you keep doing what you're doing, you're eventually going to be behaving badly just to achieve some sense of relief, in the sense of having affairs or being sneaky or starting a gambling habit or maybe, taking some drugs illicitly. I think for those people, it's really, to me, it is the case that sometimes the universe puts a gun to our head and says, yeah, you got to make a move.
So it's when the familiar becomes overwhelmingly unacceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's still scary, but it's not as scary as losing my identity and becoming someone I really don't like. That's even worse. So for cowards out there like me, you want to wait until you're so miserable, yet so self-aware that you have no choice.
Yeah.
Now, for the really gifted, for those who have foresight, for those who are not cowardly like me, you can decide this much sooner. You don't have to wait for all the years of misery. You can decide early on that, oops, I really made a bad mistake. I shouldn't have gotten into this relationship. And those people often feel guilty because their society would say, well, what do you mean? You've only given this marriage 6 months, or you've only been in this relationship such a brief period of time. You really haven't given it a chance. I think 6 months would be plenty of time to give a relationship a chance and to look for those who are not cowards. For those of us who are cowards or woefully lacking insight, we need years.
Yeah.
We need some years of misery before we finally get clunked over the head with the 2x4 and realize, yeah, I gotta make a move.
Yeah. I had a friend who just got out of a marriage after probably around that time, 6 months or so.
Unbelievable. And so he's obviously very courageous and very insightful.
Yeah, it was a she. But there were some things that I was concerned about just from working with you, hearing about it before they did get married. But then, it all came crashing down, I guess, well, 6 months. But yeah, she was like, I know this isn't how I'm not doing this.
Well, I think that women, if I could say this without sounding too sexist, because I love being a man and everything, and I love working with men as much as I do, which is quite a lot. But I do think women have a much greater amount of dissatisfaction to even begin with, because we live in a society where equality is not widely embraced, not universally embraced, and where abuse can often tend to be one-sided. So, after being in a relationship with somebody where you don't feel valued, even for only 6 months, I think it would be time to move on. And I'm not saying that women are the only ones who don't feel valued, because upon reflection, I realized I wasn't valued in my relationship, but I never had been valued. So it was the normal for me. But I think women are, somewhat gifted in this way because they tend as a demographic to be more stereotypically in touch with their feelings. And they, I think rightfully value their feelings quite a bit more than men do because they are in touch with those feelings. And I just want to say for those listening who are maybe rolling their eyes at the discussion of feelings, I think if you want to have a happy life, you have to be attentive to your feelings. And if your feelings are anything other than happy, those feelings are your brain's way of reasoning using variables that are so complex that on a cognitive level, we can't really speak to maybe exactly why just yet. But if you're feeling unhappy, there's probably a very clear explanation awaiting a lot of introspection and maybe some therapy, maybe some reflection over a period of years where you can become more articulate. But I think feelings are a justifiable basis for at least raising one's hand and calling attention to the problem.
Yeah. Cool. I want to kind of stay on the topic, but she also says, the author Hilary Kelly in the article, she says a common thread on Stucktopian TV is the contrast of two worlds. And so these two worlds I thought were really relevant to relationships. One is the inside world, and that's held together by delusion, and an outside world, and that's the unknown, is what we were talking about. And I when I read that, thinking, I was like, I think many people in relationships are delusional to an
well, I know I was also, in a very protracted religious phase of my life. So part of the delusion and the irrational beliefs and the denial itself were all about, how if I had the Lord in my life, well, of course I would have a sterling relationship. After all, I'd married a Christian and we're both Christians and we're both going to church. But that was really a veneer over the presentation of our marriage. And it really, we'd be arguing on the way to church, for example, and then stop arguing as soon as we stepped outside the car.
Yeah.
Because, well, we're at church now. People are looking. So we have to keep up appearances. And, it's refreshing to be able to leave all of that behind and just call things for what they are.
Yeah. And I just, and then the outside is that just unknown, which we talked about, which is difficult for people. One thing she also says at the bottom, she says about a character or the severance procedure is Mark's bleak hope to trade emotional pain for perpetual numbness. I just thought that line was
it's
relevant.
Pretty great. And that's what severance is about. There's actually a surgery where the character has that part of their brain severed. So it's mysterious. How does that happen exactly? And I haven't watched the whole series, but when they're on the job, it's all about the job. But when they go home, they remember nothing about the job. So the two worlds, to escape emotional pain, I can see why that's attractive. And in the story, there's a reason why the main character has emotional pain. I don't want to be a spoiler on that, but the emotional pain, I would argue, is a vital data stream that helps me guide myself through life. My emotional pain informs me as to my needs, and my emotional pain is as vital and important a part of me as any of my other thoughts or feelings.
Well, and you were saying it's relevant. You need to have emotions and relationships and feelings. And if you don't have that, then you're entering that numb state.
Well, imagine if your child didn't have the capacity for feeling pain and they put their hand on a hot stove, and I actually knew somebody in that situation who only realized there was a problem when he could smell burning flesh. Well, we don't want to wait until that point that we smell burning flesh, which would be indicative of profound damage to the organism we call humanity. So I think being able to be in touch with our pain is vital, and yet culturally, still so many men are discouraged from paying attention to their pain. And what was it she said in the article was the alternative to feeling inner pain?
Perpetual numbness. Trade emotional pain for perpetual numbness.
Yeah, the perpetual numbness. Gosh, and you see this in that TV show Severance. It's just awful. But you see it psychically in some of the other TV shows she mentions, like Silo and
or Fallout.
Yeah, Fallout's done the same thing, where people deceive themselves and think they're so lucky when actually they're leading a very numb existence. Mm-hmm. And it's really not, they're not facing the challenges that life has actually put before them. They've settled for survival instead of really looking at what would be necessary for them to thrive. Mm-hmm. And to be numb is really kind of, as I look back over it in this conversation right now, I think that was a lot of my former existence, was just going through life as a very numb man. Mm. What G.K. Chesterton called men without chests, because they didn't have a heart. They weren't feeling anything.
All right. You feel like you went through the majority of your life or not the majority, but a lot of your life like that?
My younger years for sure, because I think I've said before on these podcasts, there was enough pain in my early years that when I saw Mr. Spock on the early editions of Star Trek, it was like, oh, yes, that's the answer. I want to be just like him. But, that was me as an adolescent, like 13, 14 years old, deciding that. And it really isn't a viable path toward having an adult life.
Yeah. Yeah, I relate to that in certain. I feel like I had the heart, but then I just didn't know how to use it properly.
So you were having the feelings, but you weren't maybe listening to them?
Yeah, a lot of that. A lot of not listening to it, or not knowing how to even have a conversation with someone in a relationship, being afraid of conflict, like just a lot of not knowing how to express it, I guess, feeling it, but not knowing how to express it. So that's almost like a sci-fi sort of hell. It's right. Like you can feel it, but you can't articulate it, or you don't know how to put the words to it.
Yeah. I've been working with a lot of men in therapy in group, and we were talking about the necessary foundation for intimate relationships. And we realized, no, before you even get to meeting the other person, you have to pre-game this shit, right? You have to pre-game it in the sense of being a successful adult. And as a successful adult would be somebody who's figured out a life where he is happy. Whether you're happy because of a Stoic philosophy, you've figured out how you can have satisfaction in life, or you've figured it out more like an Epicurean philosopher, and you have so much pleasure in your life that you take satisfaction from your life. Either way, happiness is an essential. And if an individual, male or female, doesn't have a happy adult life, they're really not ready to get into a relationship, right? Because if I'm not happy, what normal woman is going to want to share that life with me?
Yeah.
And the same in return. I wouldn't want to share the life of a woman who is chronically unhappy. Now, I think there's a way to figure out how to be happy, but I like the way one therapist put it. I think it was no, it wasn't. It was the founder of Gestalt therapy. And I think he said that if I can't live without her, then I can't live with her. Mm-hmm. And for me, that makes sense in the sense that my need for a full life as a single person is so important, because it then allows me to be free of the excessive pathological neediness. That means I have to grab on to the first woman who pays attention to me, and that without her, I've lost everything. And instead, because most relationship efforts don't work out, if it doesn't work out, I'm left with a mere sense of disappointment. Like, oh, that's too bad. instead of the other word starting with the D, devastation, where the rainforest has been clear cut and there's nothing left alive on the ground. That's devastation. So I'd rather be mildly disappointed by something not working out. And that frees me to do a more accurate qualitative analysis of, her and I together, what would that look like? How happy could we be? Would that really work for us? And so striving for happiness, again, a very important emotion that guides us and that is a North Star in our existence. If we're not happy as a single person, we better figure out a way to get happy.
Yeah.
That's a real problem. That would be a reason to go to therapy just as a single person, and then that would be part of becoming a successful adult. Because if you're setting a foundation for a successful adult relationship, you have to start off with the proper 2 ingredients to successful adults.
Yeah.
I know that sounds overly simplified, but it's amazing how in hindsight, the post-game analysis would indicate, oh, yeah, I didn't pick somebody who was an adult, or gee, I wasn't even an adult now that I think about it. A lot of people reflect and come up with those conclusions.
Yeah, I can imagine. So can you keep going because there's still some stuff on the article, so I'm just going to keep going.
Did she pay you to go through this whole damn article? Or
well, there's so many little things that I was just reading and relating to the relationship. She says she paid me. Yes. She's New York Times, so she's paid me.
She's got the money.
She's got the money. Yeah. So she says, in these shows, the characters summon the will to recognize the oppression inherent in these systems and to change their conditions. So that I thought was really cool because it's like, to me, again, in relationships, you have to kind of summon the will to recognize the oppression inherent in the system, which is the system of the relationship, and then to change your condition.
Well, she's a writer of such talent that I despair of ever being a writer like her, because I don't think it gets said better than that. But summoning the will, like, how do you do that? What's that all about? And I think the mechanics of it are first recognizing your feelings and valuing your feelings. And then maybe if you haven't yet summoned the will, like with a profound sense of revulsion at what it is you've built, to then start talking to people you feel safe with. Hopefully you still have friends. And if you don't have any friends, I think after creating friends, God moved on to therapists. You could get a therapist and talk to a therapist about this. And most therapists would be only too glad to listen.
Yeah. And I think it's just, they really have to get honest with themselves. Because I know in my relationship, I was not honest with myself in my last one, and I wouldn't be honest with myself, and then I wouldn't communicate it, and then I would just imagine it being better in my head, maybe it was for a week or so, and then it just reverted back.
Well, your friend who figured it out, what was her first name?
The one who was
after
in divorce,
6 months.
Tracy.
So, getting in touch with our inner Tracy, that courageous spirit who has clarity of vision, who sees the mistake and the humility to own it. That was another thing I didn't have. I just kept thinking, I need to try harder. I need to work more. I can make this thing get off the ground. I know I can. And that was all a deception and an illusion that I'd been telling myself for years in other areas of my life, and persistence made it work out. But when it's persistence in an endeavor that requires another person working equally hard, that doesn't work out.
Yeah, no, it does not. This was a really good line. She says, in our world.
Oh my God, more good lines. Jeez.
Yeah.
She's good. She's really good.
She says, in our world, the small comforts offered by a real life stucktopia could feel like consolation for staying trapped.
Yes.
And I thought that was I thought about the small comforts I had in my last relationship. Watching TV together.
Yeah. Sometimes just simply not being alone.
Not being alone.
Not having to face being alone. Sometimes it's sex. Sometimes, it might be financial security. But I think whatever it is, this collectively amounts to no more than small comfort compared to the violence I'm doing to my own psyche by staying.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And then she also says a little later on, it's like, the behaviors are perpetuating your own stuckness, but they feel too good to give up.
Yeah.
And it's like that right there is like the lie that people are telling themselves in many relationships. Or at least I told myself.
Well, I think, they feel, I don't forget how she said it because it was so eloquent, but it was, that feels too good to give up. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was more about the alternative felt too frightening to embrace. So the idea of, just throwing the canvas in the trash and then starting all over again, that was frightening. Starting a whole new painting or a whole new novel.
Yeah.
Sometimes I read about novelists who spent a year or more working on a book only to just set it aside and forget about it. And then
a year or more, that they're lucky.
Yeah, right.
I have one that's over 10 years old.
Oh my gosh. Just cut my throat right now. Yeah. I can't do that. But the idea of being able to humbly accept that I can't do this right now. And I think that's a key phrase, right now. This is not really for me right now. Maybe it helps us kind of shoehorn our thoughts into accepting that maybe I could be capable of doing something better in the future or something different that would be better for me.
Well, she also says here a little later, she says, we're cogs because breaking out of our prescribed slots seems deeply difficult and uncomfortable. And we kind of talked on that as well, about that's the whole thing about breaking out of the thing and moving into the unknown.
Yeah, it's a brilliantly written essay. And it sort of surprised me that she did stick with talking about politics and the way things are culturally in our society. But her loss is my gain because it all applies. The same thinking applies to relationships. And I think for those who are in a relationship that's really stuck, you can't read this essay without seeing it at the same time. I think it'd be really hard for somebody to not see that as you're reading this. So
the relation to relationships.
Yeah, the meaning that this essay has for relationships is just, it's right there at your fingertips. And I don't know how a miserably relationship situated person could read this and not go, hey, wait a minute. That's a little bit like my marriage.
Yeah. Well, this line kind of then, we're getting towards the end now. We're almost wrapping up here. But she says, this line kind of throws a little curveball, or it did to me. We're not stuck in our circumstance. We're stuck in the ways of living that perpetuate it.
So what did that mean to you?
That meant to me that it's not our circumstance as far as the relationship. It's the ways of living. So the ways of living that we are living are kind of like lies, or they're kind of, we have a low standard of living for ourselves. That's what it kind of felt like. So it's like we think it's the circumstance, but it's actually the ways of living that perpetuate it, and the way that we live maybe in the society, or the way that we're taught to live, or the way that we think that we have to live. It's almost like we don't know any better to live higher, or live greater, or have a better relationship.
So are you saying like the circumstance would be more or less the two of you together, and the way of living would be more like what you are doing with your own life?
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's kind of heady and kind of a lot. That's how I was kind of looking at it. So it's like, you think it's like we're stuck in this relationship that maybe is dissatisfying, but we're stuck in the ways of living that perpetuate it.
So it's more, I'm stuck in my life.
Well, both people are. I mean, if they don't, because they both don't know that there's something, like I think you or Sharon will say, people don't know what's on the menu. It's almost like they don't know that they could be living differently.
Yeah. Well, like I said, though, there are those people for whom a very typical relationship where one person feels stuck, the other person may feel like they've discovered their Eden. Mm-hmm. This is perfect. I love it. Thank you, universe, for bringing this relationship to me. I never dreamed there was any problem until you opened your mouth and ruined it all for me.
But that always, I would love to meet someone like that and be like, hold on a second, really? It's like, how, like, I'm sure it happens, but it's like, how is a person just completely oblivious? Because even in my last relationship, my ex wasn't happy, and I was like, yeah, I'm not either. Let's talk about it. Let's work on it. No, too late. So it was like that sort of thing. No, you lost, is,
right.
I'm out of here.
Right. And that's because, I mean, that you get to that point where the feelings are so gone that there's no motivation left, because the emotions are the motivation for doing so many of these hard things.
Yeah.
Like even giving your life up for someone you love, that's inspired by an emotion, love, and maybe to a lesser extent, other emotions like loyalty or a desire to protect. And it's, once you've lost all of that, there's no gas in the engine anymore. This thing isn't going forward. So I can kind of see where she's coming from when she dumped you. But wouldn't it have been great if a year earlier or 6 months earlier she had said, we need to make some changes?
Yeah. We both just didn't know what we were doing. I mean, looking back and doing the debriefing on it all, it's just like we both failed in various ways. And it just sucks when that happens to people. And
it really does suck. And that gets us back over from Stucktopia to Sucktopia.
That's this whole new essay.
Because, what really sucks in that is how sex education is so grossly inadequate that it ill prepares us for sexual relationships. And those relationships are what provide the context for that sexual activity, whether it's intercourse or just exchanging affection, even affection in public. The relationship itself is something that neither sex education in public school nor the teachings of well-meaning parents nor the church or any other religion has anything helpful to say. And so we modern humans are left to reinvent the wheel or rediscover fire and to figure this out for ourselves. And so people like you and me have these like starter marriages where, whether we're legally married or not, we take a good run at it, doing our very best, because of course we want to be successful, only to find out emotionally, the emotions are sort of the bottom line. When you add up all the columns and you subtract all the deficits and you see what's left, if you're unhappy, that is the summary of your relationship.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling it. I'm really miserable in this. It's not working for me at all. Yeah. And then the question too is, well, at all, or like only 50%? Because if it's not, how much of it are you willing to have not working to consider yourself stuck? Because I can easily imagine, and meeting someone who's really wonderful, but just not doing my due diligence and performing an intentional interview because of my neediness. And then a fairly decent human being, get together with her, and she's a wonderful and decent human being, but we're just not right for each other. And that happens a lot too. And then it's like, then you feel really guilty because you're really stuck. That guilt keeps us very stuck because, well, I don't want to hurt her feelings, or I feel guilty for taking up so much of her time, or gosh, we've been married this long. I don't know. It just feels like a cheap shot to just walk away from this.
Yeah.
And I think, but what you said earlier, I think is really true. I think even if only one person is complaining and the other person is claiming that, no, I love this relationship. Ted, how can you really love your relationship when your partner's just told you they're unhappy?
Yeah. And there has to be behaviors that you see. Like, I knew she wasn't happy. I'm like, she doesn't seem happy. And then, but I don't know.
Yeah. The expression on her face, the lack of intensity when she gives you a hug, even that.
What's a hug? Wait, what is that?
Well, when I come home from work and my wife works from home. So when we greet each other, there's real joy. There's excitement. Oh, I'm glad to be reunited with you.
Yeah.
And for, I think those couples who reunite at the end of their workday and there's like, wah, 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 nothing there. You just die a little bit every day in those relationships.
I agree. And I saw myself dying. I saw the relationship dying. And I just again, I just
so awful.
Didn't even, I was like, oh, then I think I go back to that whole we're stuck in the ways of living. I'm like, well, this is just relationships. This
is the way it is.
This is the way it is, but not anymore.
But if you've never been an adult of that age, and none of us have until we get there, you don't know that maybe there's something different, or that this isn't the way it is. I've had plenty of people talk to me as if it were perfectly normal. They would say, well, when we first got together, we were having sex like 5 times a week. And then, a couple of years went by and we were having sex maybe twice a month. And, that's what happens when you get married.
Yeah.
And no, that's not what happens. That's what happens in your marriage. And I can understand why that happened, considering all the things you shared with me. But that is not the norm for everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just want to hit this one. This line reminded me of just exactly what we're trying to do on this podcast, and with you writing articles for Psychology Today and all that. She says, if enough of us give up the sense that things are inevitable, that we're stuck, it's possible that we can course correct humanity, or at least nudge it toward a hopeful path.
Gosh, that's my dream. I'm hoping sometime before I die, I'd like to live long enough to see America reconfigure its expectations about relationships and holy matrimony and their sex lives. I'd love to see people intelligently managing their love lives. But even if it happens after I pass, it gives me joy just to think about that, because there's this endless amount of pain and suffering that occurs otherwise. If we don't figure these things out, really, would you want to have this be your legacy to your children and your grandchildren? Is this the kind of life you wish for them? But, well, if it's the life you're leading, that is really you're guilty then of being a co-conspirator in the machine that's trying to get your kids to have the same low expectations of happiness.
Yeah. And I think you're giving it that nudge. Maybe it's not going to change the whole thing, but I thought that was just that word choice, at least a nudge.
At least a
it's
nudge.
Because it's not like some people are like, I want to change it now, or it's like, it's got to, it's like, this change is hard, and you're changing the entire consciousness of, or the changing the zeitgeist from stuck to unstuck. And it's like, you're in the relationship area, giving it that little nudge.
Well, and I know this is possible. I'm confident that it's possible, because we've changed so many things. Just one ridiculous kind of tiny little example, but that saved tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives, is something as simple as a seatbelt on a modern car. Because when I was a little boy, there were no seatbelts, and then they were introduced and nobody used them. But after decades of public service announcements talking about how important it was and the safety, and then legislators passing laws requiring people to either buckle up or get a ticket, and as we as a society realized, no, this is a good idea. Most of us now wear our seatbelts. Most of us wear our seatbelts. Most of us survive crashes. Most of us escape the horrible consequences of not being buckled in during an auto accident. And if we can do it with PSAs and some laws about getting a ticket if you don't buckle up, I have a feeling that the way life itself operates, the emotional pain of being in the wrong relationship, combined with some education in the form of, what is this podcast anyway, but an extended public service announcement trying to describe to people how to even think about relationships, then yeah, we should be able to get to that same nudge, as she calls it, at least. And with that nudge, we begin gaining some momentum and getting away from the inertia of doing nothing, just continuing on with business as usual.
Yeah. Great. So we'll wrap it up there. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is, hi, Steve. Why won't people get help for their addictions even when it is clearly a destructive force in their lives?
Well, it's funny that this question gets posed next to this podcast, because you might as well say that about those of us who are stuck in our relationships. Why don't we get unstuck? Why don't we stop doing what we're doing? Why don't we go get help? Why don't we talk to our mates when we perceive that we're stuck? Or even better yet, why don't we see how stuck we are even when we're stuck for years? Why don't we admit that? Well, for so many reasons, and she points them out in this essay. It feels safe and secure to keep doing what we've always been doing.
Yeah.
And I think for those who have addictions or compulsions, which I think are far more common than even addictions, like what therapists call pathological gambling. For those of us who are recovering control freaks, that would be a compulsion. People who are consistently codependent, taking better care of others than they are of themselves. All of these behaviors have a certain payoff to them, and we don't want to give that up, and we find it hard to give it up because it feels so right, and it helps us to avoid the feelings that are otherwise even worse, like just feeling hurt, feeling scared, feeling lost, feeling like we have no value or no worth in our lives. And it really takes some courage. Again, it's very parallel to this whole last hour's conversation, to realize, no, there is a way to do this, and just look around you, because there are non-alcoholics or other people who are not addicted to fentanyl or other drugs, people who don't gamble, and yet somehow they manage to have a great life. And if they can do it, there must be a secret there that perhaps those of us who are compulsive or addicted, we don't have. So let's figure that out. But that's why they don't do it, I think, is because of those emotions. And until they see it, and until they begin to have faith that there is an option that's really not only possible, but really enjoyable, I don't think they can make that switch. I know, like, every day in my office, I see these patients, and I do mean every day. And just the other day, someone was talking about his father, who has been a compulsive drinker or addicted to alcohol for my client's entire life. And he just doesn't even think about it. And part of that, in his case, is the effect of the alcohol itself, because he goes into a blackout and he has no idea the next morning why everybody in the house is furious with him, because he loves everybody and he just wants to have a great life and get along. He has no idea the damage that he wrought the night before.
And one other thing, which I know you love, a little bit of self-love.
Yeah, I think, for most of us, it's about escaping the feelings that we medicate ourselves with our codependence or our gambling or our addictions to substances. But, I think for us to realize, if you, by self-love, you mean actually caring about your life,
your body.
Yeah. If you mean that, then they're not even thinking about that. Yeah. As their liver goes south on them, or they develop cancer, or they're getting, as they're wasting the years of their life pursuing these self-defeating patterns of behavior, it's really hard to make those changes. I think it's hard to make changes, and I think the key for the rest of us, when we see someone we love doing that, and I'm saying this to everybody as well as to myself, is to maintain detachment. It really helps to go to Al-Anon if you're in that situation with an alcoholic. Going to Al-Anon and realizing that your identity is not enmeshed with the other person's, or at least it doesn't have to be. And then to be able to let go of them with love. And the word for that is detachment. And letting go with love simply means not stopping to love, not giving up loving them, but recognizing that they're adults and they get to choose to drink, and they get to choose to drink themselves to death. And that is their journey, and that's their life. And wow, that is sure is sad. And that's sure too bad that they're doing that. But I need to get to a place where I can accept that, so that I don't become that shrill complainer and critic who's trying to guilt trip them into getting sober.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for that answer. Thank you for the question. And thank you all for listening. We will catch you next week.